The year was 1872, and the land around Tule Lake in Northern California had become a place of fear and fire. The Modoc people were fighting for something that should never have been a fight: the right to stay on their own land, to live where their ancestors had lived for thousands of years. Among the warriors was a young man named Chooks. He wasn't born angry, nobody is, but life had carved that anger into him piece by piece, until it felt like the only thing keeping him alive. He was 23 years old, but his eyes looked much older, carrying memories that weighed more than any man should have to carry. Chooks remembered a different time. He remembered being a boy, running through the tall grass near the lake with his younger sister, laughing at nothing in particular the way children do. He remembered his mother's hands, gentle and strong, weaving baskets from tule reeds while humming old songs. He remembered his father teaching him to fish, to hunt, to read the land like a book written in wind and water. But those memories felt like they belonged to someone else now, someone who didn't exist anymore. Everything had changed when the white settlers came in greater numbers. At first, there had been promises, treaties signed, hands shaken, words spoken about peace and coexistence. But promises are easy to make and even easier to break. The government decided the Modoc people needed to move to a reservation, to share land with their old enemies, the Klamath tribe. It was like asking someone to live in their neighbor's house after burning down their own. Some Modoc people tried to make it work. They went to the reservation, tried to adapt, tried to survive. But the land was poor, the rations were scarce, and the tensions with the Klamath were constant. Disease spread through the camps like wildfire. That's where Chooks lost his sister. She was only 14 when the fever took her, shivering in a crowded tent that smelled of sickness and despair. Her name was Litsa, which meant bright morning in their language. But there had been nothing bright about her death. Nothing morning fresh about the way she'd withered away while the government agents promised medicine that never came. After that, something inside Chooks broke. Or maybe it froze. He stopped feeling things the way he used to. Pain became something distant, like watching smoke rise from a fire on a far-off hill. When his leader Kinpuash, the one the white men called Captain Jack, decided to leave the reservation and return to their homeland, Chooks followed without hesitation. They all knew what it meant. It meant war. It meant the U.S. Army would come after them. It meant some of them, maybe all of them, would die. But at least they would die as Modoc, on Modoc land, not as prisoners on someone else's dirt. The war that followed was brutal. The Modoc warriors were outnumbered, outgunned, but they knew the land in ways the soldiers never could. They used the lava beds, the caves, the hidden passages that their people had known for generations. They fought with everything they had, not because they wanted to kill, but because they wanted to live free. Chooks became known among the warriors as someone who didn't hesitate. When there was a dangerous mission, he volunteered. When there was a hard choice to make, he made it without flinching. The other warriors respected him, but they also kept a certain distance. There was something in his eyes that made people uncomfortable, a coldness that suggested he'd already said goodbye to life. He had learned to see the world in simple terms. There were his people and there were the enemies. There was survival and there was death. There was no room for doubt, no space for softness. Softness got people killed. Compassion was a luxury they couldn't afford. When he looked at the white settlers, he didn't see individuals. He saw the faces of the government agents who'd let his sister die. He saw the soldiers who'd forced his people from their homes. He saw everyone who'd looked the other way while his world burned down around him. His mother, before she'd grown too weak to speak much, had tried to talk to him about forgiveness, about not letting hate consume him. But he couldn't hear those words anymore. They sounded like echoes from a world that no longer existed, wisdom that had no place in a time of war. The heart that stays soft in hard times is the heart that survives, she had told him. But he'd seen too many soft hearts stop beating. He'd buried too many gentle souls. In his mind, survival meant becoming hard, becoming stone, becoming something that couldn't be hurt anymore because it had already lost everything worth losing. The other warriors noticed that Chooks never spoke about what would come after the war. They made plans sometimes, sitting around small fires, talking quietly about the lives they'd build if they somehow won, if they somehow got their land back. They talked about families they'd raise, homes they'd build, seasons of peace where they could grow old watching their children play. Chooks never joined these conversations. He sat at the edge of the firelight, cleaning his weapons, his face unreadable. When anyone asked him about the future, he just shook his head. There is no after, he'd say. There's only now. And now in the spring of 1872, the war was at its height. Small skirmishes happened almost daily. The army was pressing in from all sides, trying to force the Modoc warriors out of their stronghold in the lava beds. Supplies were running low. Everyone was tired, hungry, running on determination and little else. It was during one of these tense, desperate times that Chooks and 2 other warriors were sent on a scouting mission. They needed to find food, supplies, anything that could help their people hold out a little longer. They moved through the landscape like shadows, avoiding army patrols, staying low, staying quiet. That's when they came across the small homestead near the edge of the lake. Smoke was rising from the chimney, but something felt wrong. The place was too quiet. No animals in the yard, no sounds of daily life. As they got closer, they realized the family had fled, probably warned about Modoc warriors in the area, probably terrified of what might happen if they stayed. The house had been left in a hurry. Doors stood open, belongings scattered. The warriors searched quickly, looking for food, ammunition, anything useful. And that's when they heard it, a small sound coming from somewhere below the house. Someone was still there. Chooks felt his jaw tighten, his hand moving automatically to his weapon. This was the moment his life had been leading to, the moment where everything soft and human inside him had been burned away, leaving only the warrior, only the survivor. Only the stone-hearted man who did what needed to be done. He moved toward the sound, his footsteps heavy on the wooden floor, his shadow falling across the door to the root cellar like a dark prediction of what was about to come. The root cellar door was heavy, made of thick wood that had swollen with moisture over the years. Chooks pulled it open and the rusty hinges screamed in protest, breaking the silence like a warning bell. Cool, damp air rushed up from below, carrying the smell of earth and stored vegetables. At first he couldn't see anything in the darkness. Then his eyes adjusted and he saw her. A girl, maybe 12 years old, pressed into the far corner of the cellar like she was trying to become part of the wall itself. She was small for her age, thin in a way that spoke of too many missed meals. Her dress was old and patched, her hair tangled and unwashed. But what struck Chooks most were her eyes. They were wrong. Clouded over with a milky white film that told him immediately. She couldn't see. She was blind. The girl's head turned toward the sound of the door, toward the footsteps on the stairs, but her eyes didn't focus on anything. They stared past him, through him, seeing nothing but darkness. "Mama," she whispered, her voice cracking with hope and fear. "Mama, is that you?" Chooks stood frozen on the stairs. Behind him, his 2 companions crowded into the doorway, looking down into the cellar. "It's just a girl," one of them said in their language. His name was Wayhax, and he was older, a warrior who'd seen many battles. "A settler's child," the other one added. This was Jikok, younger, angry in the way young men at war often are. They left her behind. The girl's breath was coming in short, panicked gasps now. She could hear voices, but she couldn't understand the language. She knew these weren't the voices of her family. "Who's there?" she called out, her voice rising with terror. "Please, I can't see." "I can't see anything. Mama said she'd come back for me. She said to wait here, to be quiet, and she'd come back." But Chooks could read the truth in the abandoned house above them. No one was coming back for this girl. Her family had fled in such panic, such fear of the Modoc warriors, that they'd left their blind daughter behind. Maybe they'd planned to come back later when it was safe. Or maybe, and this thought was darker, maybe they'd seen her as too much of a burden to save. Wayhack spoke quietly. "We should leave her. We came for supplies, not complications. Someone will find her eventually." "In the middle of a war zone?" Jikok laughed bitterly. "She'll be dead in 2 days. 3 if she's lucky and the weather stays warm." "Not our problem," Wayhack said, but his voice lacked conviction. "No," Jikok said, and his voice had taken on a hard edge. "We should take her. She's leverage. The settlers care about their children, even the broken ones. We could trade her for supplies, for safe passage, for what?" Wayhacks interrupted. "You think the army cares about one blind girl? You think they'll negotiate for her?" While they argued, Chooks descended the stairs slowly. The girl heard him coming and pressed herself harder against the wall, making herself as small as possible. It was a practiced movement, something she'd done many times before. "Stay away," she whimpered. "Please stay away. I'll be good. I promise I'll be good." Something about those words, "I'll be good," struck Chooks as odd. They weren't the words of a girl afraid of strangers. They were the words of a girl who'd learned to beg for mercy in her own home. He reached the bottom of the stairs and stood there, looking at her in the dim light that filtered down from above. She was trembling so violently he could see it from several feet away. "We can't just leave her," Jikok was saying from above. "And we can't take her with us. So what do we do?" The unspoken answer hung in the air like smoke. In war, there were no good choices. There were only choices that let you survive another day. A witness, even a blind one, was a risk. A child left behind might raise an alarm, might tell soldiers which direction the warriors had gone. Chooks had made hard choices before. He'd done things in this war that he knew he could never undo, never unsee. He'd become the kind of man who could make practical decisions without letting feelings get in the way. That's what warriors did. That's what survival required. He took a step closer to the girl. She flinched at the sound of his boot on the packed earth floor. "Please," she whispered. "Please, I won't tell anyone. I can't even see you. I don't know who you are. Just leave me here. Just leave me alone." But leaving her alone was its own kind of cruelty. She'd die of thirst in a few days, assuming she didn't starve first or get attacked by wild animals. The homestead was isolated, and with a war going on, no one would come looking for one abandoned child anytime soon. Chooks felt the weight of his knife at his belt. A quick end would be a mercy compared to slow death by starvation. That's what he told himself. That's what he needed to believe to do what war had taught him to do. His hand moved to his weapon. The girl couldn't see the movement, but somehow she sensed it. Maybe she heard the leather creak. Maybe she felt the shift in the air. Maybe fear had given her senses that went beyond the ordinary. "No," she breathed. "No, please. Don't." But behind him, Chooks heard Wayhak start to say something, then stop. The older warrior had seen that look before. That moment when a man makes a hard choice. There was nothing to say that would change it. Chooks raised his hand. The cellar was dim, but there was enough light to see the girl's face, to see the tears starting to run down her dirty cheeks, to see the way her mouth trembled as she tried to be brave and failed. This was war. This was survival. This was what they'd all become. He'd done harder things than this. He'd watched harder things than this happen. One more choice, one more moment, one more thing to bury deep inside where it couldn't touch him. His hand was in the air, ready to strike, ready to end this problem quickly and move on. That's all she was now, a problem to solve, an obstacle to remove. He couldn't afford to see her as anything else, but then she spoke again, and the words she said changed everything. "Please," she sobbed, her voice breaking into pieces. "Please, don't hit me again. Again." That one word echoed in the small space. Again. Not "don't hit me," but "don't hit me again." And suddenly, Chooks saw the girl differently. He saw the way she held her arms up to protect her head, not like someone facing danger for the first time, but like someone who'd learned exactly how to cover the places that hurt most when someone struck you. He saw the old bruises on her arms, faded yellow and green. He saw the way her shoulders hunched, making herself smaller, making herself less of a target. This girl had been hit before, many times before, by someone who should have protected her, someone she should have been able to trust. And now here he was, another person with a raised hand, another source of pain in a life that had clearly already held too much of it. His hand began to shake. Chooks stood there, his hand raised, trembling in the dim light of the root cellar. It started as a small shake, barely noticeable, but within seconds his entire arm was quivering like a leaf in a strong wind. He'd raised his hand in anger before. He'd struck enemies, fought soldiers, done what war demanded. But his hand had never shaken, not once. He'd been steady, cold, efficient. That's what had kept him alive. But now, looking at this terrified blind girl cowering in the corner, expecting pain because pain was what she knew, something inside him cracked. Not broke, cracked. Like ice on a frozen lake when the spring sun finally touches it. "Please don't hit me again," she'd said. Again. The word kept repeating in his mind. It wasn't just a word. It was a story. It told him that someone had hurt this child before. Someone she probably lived with. Someone who should have loved her. And she'd learned to recognize the sound of anger, the shift in breathing the moment before a hand became a fist. Chooks slowly lowered his hand. He stood there staring at the girl, and for the first time in months, maybe years, he felt something he'd thought he'd successfully killed inside himself. He felt his heart breaking. Behind him on the stairs, Wayhak spoke softly. "Chooks?" What are you doing?" He didn't answer. He couldn't. His throat felt tight like someone was squeezing it. The girl was still pressed against the wall, her arms over her head, waiting for the blow she was certain was coming. She'd gone quiet now, the way prey goes still when the predator is close, hoping that stillness might mean survival. And suddenly Chuk saw someone else's face instead of hers. He saw Litsa, his little sister. She'd been about this age when everything started falling apart. He remembered how scared she'd been when the government agents came to force them to the reservation. He remembered holding her hand, promising her everything would be okay, knowing he was lying but needing her to feel safe. He remembered the last time he'd seen her alive, burning with fever in that crowded tent. Her eyes clouded with sickness the way this girl's eyes were clouded with blindness. He remembered how he'd felt so helpless, so useless, unable to protect the one person he loved most in the world. And here was another girl, about the same age, just as helpless, just as abandoned by the people who should have protected her. The difference was that this time he had the power to help or hurt. This time he was the one making the choice. Chuk's. Jikok's voice now from the doorway above. "We need to move. The army patrols—" "I know," Chuk said, his voice rough. Those were the first words he'd spoken since entering the cellar. The girl's head turned toward his voice. She was trying to figure out where he was, trying to track him without the benefit of sight. "Are you going to kill me?" she asked. Her voice was steady now, resigned. She'd asked the question like someone asking about the weather, like someone who'd already accepted the answer. That question hit Chuk's harder than any punch he'd ever taken. She was 12 years old, and she could ask about her own death with the calm of someone much older. What kind of life had she lived that made her so familiar with cruelty? "No," he heard himself say. The word came out before he'd consciously decided to speak it. The girl didn't relax. She'd probably heard promises before that turned out to be lies. Chooks took a slow step back, giving her space. His mind was racing now, trying to figure out what to do. All his training, all his experience as a warrior, had prepared him for combat, for strategy, for survival. But nothing had prepared him for this moment, for this choice. If he left her here, she'd die slowly. If he ended her life quickly, he'd be showing a kind of mercy. But he'd also be becoming exactly the kind of monster the settlers thought his people were. If he tried to help her, he'd be putting himself and his companions at risk, possibly for nothing. There was no good choice. There was only the choice he could live with. "What's your name?" he asked in English. His English wasn't perfect, he'd learned it from traders and missionaries, but it was good enough. The girl hesitated, then whispered, "Annie. My name is Annie." "Annie," he repeated. The name made her real in a way she hadn't been before. She wasn't just the girl anymore. She was Annie, a person with a name, with a story, with a life that mattered even if the people who were supposed to care about her had decided it didn't. "Where's your family, Annie?" "They left," she said, and there was no surprise in her voice, no shock, like she'd always known they might leave her behind someday. "Mama said there were Indians coming. She said I should hide here and be real quiet. She said she'd come back." But the way she said it made it clear she didn't really believe her mother was coming back. Or maybe she'd just stopped believing in promises altogether. Chooks felt Wayhacks come down the stairs behind him. The older warrior stood beside him, looking at the girl, then at Chooks. "This is a mistake," Wayhacks said quietly in their language. "Whatever you're thinking of doing, it's a mistake. We have our own people to think about. Our own children who need us." "I know," Chooks said. "Then what are you doing?" Chooks didn't have an answer. Or rather, he had too many answers, all tangled up together. He was thinking about Litsa. He was thinking about all the children, Modoc and Settler both, who were paying the price for a war they didn't start. He was thinking about the man he'd become over the past few years, hard and cold and practical, and wondering if that was really who he wanted to be. "She can't stay here," he said finally. "So we leave her," Jikok said from above, his voice impatient. "We have to go now. The longer we stay, the more danger we're in. If we leave her, she dies, so?" Jikok's voice was cold. "The settlers left our children to die on that reservation. They left Litsa to die. Why should we care about this one?" It was a fair question. It was the question Chooks had been asking himself for months. Why should he care? Why should any of them care? The settlers had shown them no mercy, no compassion. The government had broken every promise, violated every treaty. Good people on both sides had died. and more would die before this war ended. But looking at Annie, small and blind and terrified in that dark cellar, Chooks realized something. Revenge didn't actually make anything better. It didn't bring Litsa back. It didn't fix what was broken. It just added more pain to a world already drowning in it. Because, Chooks said slowly, working out his thoughts as he spoke, if we become exactly what they think we are, then they win. They get to be right about us. They're already right about us, Jikok spat. We're the enemy. We're the savages. That's what they call us. That's what they'll always call us. Nothing we do will change that. Maybe not, Chooks agreed. But it changes who we are. It changes what we become. Wayhax put a hand on Chooks's shoulder. You can't save everyone. You tried to save Litsa and you couldn't. This won't bring her back. I know, Chooks said, his voice cracking slightly. But I couldn't save Litsa. Maybe I can save this one. The three warriors stood there in the cellar, and Annie waited in the corner, not understanding their language but understanding that her fate was being decided. She'd learned long ago that she had no control over what happened to her. All she could do was wait and hope and try to be small enough, quiet enough, good enough that maybe someone would decide she was worth keeping alive. Chooks looked at his companions. Go, he said. Get back to camp. Tell them I'm scouting another area, that I'll meet you back at the stronghold. You're serious about this, Wayhax said. It wasn't a question, I'm serious. This is foolish, Jikok said. She's nothing to us. She's the enemy's child. She's nobody's enemy, Chooks said, his voice firm now. She's a child. A blind child who's been beaten and abandoned. And I'm not leaving her here to die. Wayhax studied Chooks's face for a long moment, then sighed. Your sister would be proud of you, he said quietly. Or she'd think you were an idiot. Maybe both. Probably both, Chooks agreed with a sad smile. If you're caught with her. Wayhax didn't finish the sentence. He didn't have to. They all knew what the army would do to a Modoc warrior caught with a settler child. They'd assume the worst, and their justice would be swift and brutal. I know the risk. Jikok shook his head in disgust. You're throwing your life away for nothing, but fine. It's your life to waste. He turned and climbed back up the stairs. Wayhax hesitated, then reached into his pack and pulled out a small bundle of dried meat. He pressed it into Chooks's hand. You'll need this, he said simply, then followed Jikok up the stairs. Chooks listened to their footsteps fade away, listened to the door of the homestead open and close, listened to the silence return. Then he turned back to Annie, still huddled in her corner, and wondered what in the world he was going to do now. The cellar felt smaller now that Chooks was alone in it with Annie. The silence pressed down on them both, heavy and uncertain. He could hear her breathing, quick and shallow, the breathing of someone waiting for something bad to happen. Chooks sat down on the bottom step of the stairs, trying to make himself less threatening. It didn't really matter since she couldn't see him, but somehow it felt important anyway. He needed to think, and he couldn't think while standing over her like an executioner. Annie, he said softly. I'm not going to hurt you, she didn't respond. She'd probably heard those words before too, right before someone hurt her anyway. He tried again. My name is Chooks. I'm going to help you. Now she spoke and her voice was suspicious. Help me do what? Good question. Help her do what exactly? He couldn't take her with him back to his people. A white girl in a Modoc war camp would cause all kinds of problems, and not just for him. Some of his people had lost children to settler violence. They wouldn't exactly welcome an enemy child into their midst. He couldn't take her to the army. They'd arrest him on sight, probably shoot him before he could explain. Even if he somehow survived the encounter, they'd never believe he was trying to help. They'd think he'd taken her as a hostage or worse. He couldn't leave her here. That much he knew for certain. Without help, without sight, without anyone coming back for her, she wouldn't last long. The only option was to get her to safety, somewhere close to other settlers, but not so close that he'd be caught in the process. He'd have to travel with her, guide her, keep her alive until he could leave her somewhere she'd be found. It was possibly the stupidest plan he'd ever had, and that was saying something because war made people do a lot of stupid things. I'm going to take you somewhere safe, he said, working it out as he spoke. Somewhere away from the fighting. Somewhere with other people like you. People like me. Her voice was bitter for someone so young. There ain't no people like me. I'm broken. That's what Pa always said. Broken and useless. Chooks felt a flash of anger toward the father he'd never met. What kind of man said that to his own daughter? What kind of person looked at a child and saw only what was wrong with them? You're not broken, he said firmly. You just can't see. That's different. That's what makes me broken, she said, and she sounded so tired. I can't work like other people. Can't help with the farm. Can't do nothing useful. I'm just another mouth to feed. That's why they left me, probably. One less problem to worry about. Chooks closed his eyes. He understood family loyalty, the ties that bound people together. But he was also learning that not all families were bound the same way. Some bonds were made of love and some were made of duty. And when duty became too heavy, some people just let it drop. Well, he said, I'm not leaving you, so you're stuck with me for now? Annie was quiet for a moment. Then she asked, Are you really an Indian? A Modoc? Yes. Ma said the Modocs were monsters. Said they killed babies and burned houses and did terrible things. Chooks laughed, but it was a sad sound. I'm sure she did say that. And you know what? Some Modocs probably say the same things about white settlers. They say you're monsters too. They say you steal land and break promises and do terrible things. Are they right? Some of them are. Just like some of what your ma said is probably true too. There are monsters on both sides of any war, Annie. But most people are just scared and trying to survive and doing the best they can with bad choices. She seemed to think about that. So which one are you? A monster or just a person? It was a fair question, and honest. Chooks appreciated that. I don't know anymore, he admitted. I've done things in this war that I'm not proud of. Things I can't take back. But today, right now, I'm trying to be the kind of person my sister would want me to be. The kind of person I used to be before everything went wrong. What happened to your sister? The question was simple, but answering it felt like swallowing glass. She died. On the reservation. There was sickness and no medicine and too many people crammed into too small a space. She was about your age. I'm sorry, Annie said, and she sounded like she meant it. Me too. They sat in silence for a moment. Then Annie spoke again. If you're trying to help me, you're probably the only person who is, so thank you. Even if it doesn't work out. It'll work out, Chooks said with more confidence than he felt. But we need to leave soon. Can you walk? I can walk fine. I just can't see where I'm going. Then I'll be your eyes. But you have to trust me. Annie laughed, and it was a sharp sound. Mister, I got no choice but to trust you. You're all I got right now. She was right. And that realization weighed on Chooks more than he'd expected. This girl's life was now his responsibility. If he made a mistake, if he got caught, if he led her the wrong direction or failed to find her safety, she'd die. And it would be his fault. He'd been responsible for other lives in battle. He'd fought beside warriors who trusted him to watch their backs. But this was different. Those warriors had weapons, had skills, could defend themselves. Annie had nothing but his word that he'd help her. Okay, he said, standing up. Here's what's going to happen. We're going to leave this cellar. I'm going to look around the house and get you some food, maybe some warmer clothes. Then we're going to start walking. Walking where? East. There are settlements that direction, smaller ones farther from the fighting. It'll take us a few days, maybe 3. We'll travel mostly at night when it's safer. During the day, we'll hide and rest. Why are you doing this? Annie asked. You could just leave me here. It would be easier for you. Chooks thought about that question. He could give her a simple answer, something noble-sounding about doing the right thing. But she deserved honesty. Because, he said slowly, I've spent the last few years becoming someone I don't like very much. I've become hard and cold and angry. And today when I raised my hand to you and you said, don't hit me again, I realized that if I hurt you, if I left you here to die, I'd become exactly the kind of person I've been fighting against. The kind of person who sees other people as problems instead of as people. That's a pretty speech, Annie said. It's not a speech. It's the truth. And maybe helping you is also helping me. Maybe it's reminding me that I'm not just a warrior, not just someone who survives. Maybe it's reminding me that I'm still human. Annie was quiet for a long moment. Then she said, Okay, I'll trust you. Don't make me regret it. Chooks smiled despite himself. This girl was tougher than she looked. She'd had to be, growing up the way she had. I'll do my best not to. He stood and walked over to her, then crouched down so he was at her level. I'm going to touch your arm now, okay? Just to help you stand up. She nodded and he gently took her arm. Her bones felt small and fragile under his hand, like bird bones. She was malnourished, he realized. Probably had been for a long time. He helped her to her feet and she swayed slightly before finding her balance. "How long have you been down here?" he asked. "Since yesterday morning. Ma gave me some water and a biscuit before she left. Said to be real quiet until she came back. A day and a half without food in a cold cellar waiting for someone who wasn't coming back." Chooks felt his anger at her family rising again, but he pushed it down. Anger wouldn't help Annie now. Action would. "All right," he said. "We're going to climb these stairs. I'll go first and you hold onto my shoulder. Take it slow. There are 12 steps. How do you know there are 12? I counted on the way down. I count everything. It's a habit." They climbed the stairs slowly, Annie's small hand gripping his shoulder tightly. When they emerged into the main room of the homestead, Chooks looked around. The family had left in such a hurry that there were still plates on the table, food half-eaten. A child's doll lay abandoned in the corner. He found a sack and quickly gathered food, bread, dried meat, some cheese that hadn't gone bad yet. He found a coat that might fit Annie, too big but better than the thin dress she was wearing. He found a canteen and filled it with water from the pump outside. All the while, he kept glancing out the windows, watching for patrols, watching for danger. Every minute they stayed here was a risk. But Annie needed supplies for the journey ahead. Finally, he returned to where Annie stood waiting, exactly where he'd left her. He helped her into the coat and hung the canteen strap across her body. "Ready?" he asked. "As ready as I'll ever be," she said, and with that, they stepped out of the homestead and into the dangerous world beyond. A Modoc warrior and a blind settler girl, embarking on a journey that should never have been necessary in a world that should have been better than this. The first night of traveling was the hardest. Chooks had traveled through dangerous territory many times before, but always as a warrior among warriors, always with people who could move silently and quickly, who could defend themselves if necessary. Annie was none of those things. She stumbled over roots he forgot to warn her about. She made small sounds of pain when branches scratched her face. She moved slowly, carefully, one hand on his shoulder while he tried to guide her through the darkness, and she was terrified. He could feel it in the way her hand shook against his shoulder, could hear it in her quick breathing. Every sound in the forest made her jump. An owl's call, a branch cracking under their feet, the distant howl of a coyote. "It's okay," he kept saying. "Nothing here will hurt you. I promise." But promises were just words, and Annie had learned not to trust words. They moved east, away from the lake, away from the heart of the conflict. Chooks knew this land, but not as well as he knew the areas closer to the lava beds. Out here, he had to rely on the stars to guide them, on his sense of direction, on the hope that he was leading them the right way. Around midnight, Annie couldn't walk anymore. She'd been struggling for the last hour, her steps getting slower, her breathing heavier. When she finally stumbled and nearly fell, Chooks caught her and lowered her gently to the ground. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "I'm trying. I'm really trying. I know you are. We'll rest here for a while." They were in a small clearing ringed by pine trees. The moon was nearly full, giving enough light that Chooks could see well, though of course it made no difference to Annie. He helped her sit with her back against a tree trunk, then sat beside her. She was shivering. The coat helped, but the nights were still cold this time of year. Chooks wished he had a blanket to give her, but he'd only been able to carry so much when they left the homestead. "Are you cold?" he asked. "I'm always cold," she said simply. "Been cold for as long as I can remember." "You get used to it." That statement told Chooks more than Annie probably meant to reveal. A child who was always cold was a child who wasn't given enough warm clothes, enough food, enough care. He pulled out some of the bread and cheese he'd packed and handed it to her. "Eat," he said. "You need your strength." Annie took the food hesitantly, as if she wasn't sure she was allowed to have it. "What about you?" "I'll eat later." "You eat now." She ate slowly, savoring each bite in a way that suggested she wasn't used to having enough food. Chooks watched her and felt a familiar ache in his chest. He'd watched Litsa eat like that on the reservation, when the rations ran low and they had to make everything last. "Can I ask you something?" Annie said between bites. "Sure. Why do you talk English so good?" "I thought. I heard that Indians couldn't talk like us." Chooks smiled sadly. "We can talk just fine. Some of us learned English from traders, from missionaries. My people had to learn to talk to yours because yours kept showing up on our land. But we have our own language too. It's beautiful. It sounds like the lake, like the wind in the reeds. Olis, can you say something in your language?" He thought for a moment, then spoke in Modoc. The words flowed soft and musical in the night air. "What did you say?" Annie asked. I said, "The stars remember when all people were one people before we forgot how to see each other." "That's pretty." "Is it true?" "It's what the old ones say. That long ago, before the divisions, before the wars, people were just people. No sides, no enemies. Just humans trying to live." "I wish it was still like that," Annie said quietly. "Me too." They sat in silence for a while. The forest around them was alive with small sounds. Insects chirping, leaves rustling, the distant sound of water flowing somewhere. Annie finished her food and wiped her hands on her dress. "Chooks," she said. "Yes." "Are we going to die out here?" It was such a direct question, so honest, that Chooks had to respect it. She wasn't asking for false comfort. She was asking for truth. "I don't know," he said. "I'm going to do everything I can to get you somewhere safe. But this is dangerous. I won't lie to you about that. I appreciate that. People always lie to me. They think because I can't see, I can't tell when they're lying. But I can hear it in their voices. What do you hear in my voice?" She tilted her head, listening to something beyond his words. "I hear that you're sad. Really, really sad. Like something broke inside you and it never got fixed. But I also hear that you mean what you say. You really do want to help me." Chooks was surprised. This girl with no sight seemed to see more clearly than people with perfect vision. "You're right," he said. "I am sad. The war. It takes things from you. Things you can't get back. Like your sister. Like my sister. And my parents. And the land where I grew up. And the person I used to be before all this started. Do you think you'll ever get that person back? I don't know. Maybe parts of him. Maybe helping you is helping me find some of those parts." Annie reached out her hand, moving it slowly through the air until she found his arm. She patted it gently. "The way you might comfort a scared animal. Then I hope I can help you," she said. "You're helping me, so it's only fair." Something about that simple gesture, that small kindness from a girl who had every reason to be bitter and cruel, made Chooks's throat tight with emotion. He'd spent so long focused on survival, on fighting, on anger, that he'd forgotten what simple human kindness felt like. "Thank you," he managed to say. They rested there for about an hour, and then Chooks decided they should move again. They needed to put more distance between themselves and the area where Modoc warriors and army patrols were active. As they walked, something unexpected began to happen. They started talking. At first it was just small things. Annie asked about the sounds she heard and Chooks described them. A owl calling. He's hunting for mice. Probably has a nest nearby with babies waiting. A creek burbling. We're getting close to water. We can refill the canteen soon. The wind moving through different types of trees. That's the sound of pine needles. They sound different than oak leaves, sharper somehow. Then Annie started telling him about her life. Not all at once, but in small pieces, like she was testing to see if he'd judge her or pity her. She told him about losing her sight when she was 7. Fever, they'd said. It had taken her vision slowly, like someone pulling curtains closed one at a time until everything was dark. She told him about her father, a man who drank too much and blamed everyone else for his problems. How he'd called her useless, a burden, broken. How his hands had been heavy and his words heavier. She told him about her mother, who wasn't cruel but wasn't kind either. Who did what she had to do to survive. And if that meant ignoring what was happening to her daughter, well, that's what she did. She told him about the long days alone, sitting in corners trying to be quiet, trying to be invisible, trying to be so small that maybe they'd forget she existed and forget to be angry at her for existing. And Chooks listened. He didn't interrupt, didn't offer empty sympathy, didn't try to make it better. He just listened, and sometimes that was the most important thing. In return, he found himself talking too. About Litsa, about how she'd love to sing even though she wasn't very good at it. About his mother, who'd been the strongest person he'd ever known until the reservation broke her. About his father, who'd fought in the war and died early on, shot by soldiers while trying to protect other families. He talked about the life they'd had before, when the Modoc people lived on their own land, fishing the lake, gathering roots, living in harmony with the seasons. He described it all for Annie, painting pictures with words since she couldn't see the real thing. "It sounds beautiful," she said wistfully. "Your old life, I mean, it was. But it's gone now. Maybe not forever." Maybe someday you can go back. Maybe, Chuk said, but he didn't believe it. He'd seen how these things ended. One way or another, his people would lose. They were too outnumbered, too outgunned. The best they could hope for was survival, but it wouldn't be survival on their own terms. On the second night, they found a small abandoned shed near what used to be a lumber camp. It gave them shelter from the wind, and for the first time since they'd started traveling, Annie seemed to relax a little. "This is nice," she said, sitting on the dirt floor with her back against the wooden wall. "It's almost like a home." "It's just a shed," Chuk said. "To you, maybe. But I ain't had a real home in a long time. This is good enough." They shared the last of the bread and some dried meat. Chooks told her they'd reach a settlement by tomorrow evening if they kept up their pace. She'd be safe then with her own people, and he could disappear back into the wilderness before anyone knew he'd been there. The thought should have relieved him. His responsibility would be done. He'd have done the right thing, helped someone who needed help, proved to himself that he wasn't completely lost to bitterness and war. But instead, he felt a strange reluctance. These past 2 days traveling with Annie, talking with her, helping her, it had reminded him of who he used to be. It had given him a purpose beyond survival and revenge, and he wasn't quite ready to let that go yet. "Chooks?" Annie's voice was sleepy now. "Yes? Will I ever see you again? After you leave me with the settlers?" "Probably not," he said honestly. "It wouldn't be safe. For either of us." "That's sad." "Yes," he agreed. "It is." She was quiet for a moment, then said, "I want you to—" The third day began with Annie asking an unexpected question. What does a sunrise look like? They were preparing to move, finishing the last of their food when she asked it. Chooks paused, caught off guard. The sun was just beginning to paint the sky with color, and he realized he'd been watching it without really seeing it. Beauty had become background noise in his life of war. "Why do you want to know?" he asked. "Because I remember," Annie said softly. "Not everything, but pieces. Colors mostly. I remember orange and red and gold. I remember standing outside our old house. We had a better house then before Pa started drinking so much, and watching the sky change. It was like magic. And I want to know if I'm remembering it right." Chooks looked at the horizon. The sun was just breaking over the distant hills, sending streams of light through the morning mist. He'd seen 1,000 sunrises in his life, but he'd never had to describe one before. "Well," he began, searching for words. "Right now the sky is dark blue at the top, but down near the hills it's turning lighter. There are clouds, thin ones stretched across like fingers, and where the sun is coming up, those clouds are catching the light. They're orange like fire, but softer, more like when you hold your hand up to a candle and the light glows through your skin." Annie's face was turned toward the sunrise, even though she couldn't see it. She was smiling slightly, and there was wonder in her expression. "There's pink too," Chooks continued, warming to the task, "mixed in with the orange, and gold like honey, spreading across the lower part of the sky. The sun itself is still mostly hidden, but there's this bright spot where it's pushing through, and it's so bright I can't look straight at it." "I remember that," Annie said. "The brightness. It hurt to look at, but it was a good kind of hurt. Like it was too beautiful to look away from even though you had to. Exactly like that." They stood there together for a few more minutes. Chooks describing the changes as they happened, how the orange deepened, how the blue sky grew lighter, how the sun finally cleared the hills and turned everything golden. For those few minutes there was no war, no danger, no past or future, just a sunrise and two people sharing it. As they walked that day, something shifted between them. The fear that had colored their first days together had faded. Annie no longer flinched at every sound, no longer tensed when Chooks moved suddenly. She'd learned to trust him, truly trust him, and that trust changed everything. She asked him to describe other things, the trees they passed, the shape of the clouds, the way sunlight filtered through leaves, and Chooks found himself seeing the world differently through her questions. Things he'd stopped noticing became visible again. "What color is the lake? The one near where you lived?" Annie asked as they rested near a stream. "Blue," Chooks said, "but not just one blue. It changes. In the morning it's pale, almost gray. At noon it's deep blue like the sky. And at sunset it turns dark with orange and red reflected on the surface. My people call it many different names depending on the time of day because it's never the same lake twice. That's beautiful. I wish I could see it." "Maybe," Chooks said carefully. Seeing isn't the only way to know something. You feel the wind, right? You can tell when you're near water because the air smells different. You hear birds and know they're there even though you can't see them. Maybe that's its own kind of seeing. Annie considered this. Pa used to say I was useless because I couldn't see. He said I was only half a person. Your pa was wrong, Chook said firmly. You're whole. You're just whole in a different way. And honestly, you see some things better than people with perfect eyes. Like what? Like people. You can't see faces, so you listen to voices. You hear things other people miss. You knew I was sad just from how I spoke. Most people with eyes look right at sadness and never see it. Annie was quiet for a moment, then said, Nobody ever told me I was good at anything before. That statement made Chooks angry all over again at people he'd never meet. What kind of family, what kind of world taught a child that they had no value? Well, he said, you're good at lots of things. You're brave. You've been walking through strange country with someone you barely know and you haven't complained once. You're smart. You ask good questions and remember the answers. And you're kind. Even after everything that's happened to you, you're not mean or bitter. That takes strength. Annie's chin trembled slightly. You're going to make me cry. Sorry, no, it's okay. They're good tears. I didn't know there were good tears until right now. They sat by the stream a while longer, and Annie asked him to teach her some words in his language. He taught her how to say water and tree and friend. She practiced them carefully, her tongue struggling with sounds that weren't in English. Friend is to wish. He repeated for her. T-wish, she said, and then smiled. That's what we are, right? Friends? Chooks felt something warm spread through his chest. Yes, he said. We're friends. Good. I never had a friend before. I like it. As the afternoon went on, they talked more. Not just about big things, but small things. Annie told him about a cat she'd had once before they lost the good house. Her name was Whiskers, which is a silly name, but I was little when I named her. She used to sleep on my lap and purr so loud I could feel it in my whole body. What happened to her? Pa said she ran away. But I heard him and Ma arguing one night, and I think he got rid of her. Said we couldn't afford to feed extra mouths. Chooks told her about the dogs his family had kept. They were good hunting dogs. Smart and loyal. There was one, we called him Runner because he was so fast. He saved my life once when I was a boy. I'd fallen through ice on the lake and he barked and barked until my father came and pulled me out. Do you miss him? I miss everything about that life. Every single piece of it. Do you ever get scared? Annie asked suddenly. Of dying, I mean. In the war? Sometimes, Chooks admitted. But I'm more scared of living without purpose. Of surviving but not having anything to survive for. I used to feel like that, Annie said. Like I was just taking up space, just waiting for my life to end. But these last few days walking with you, having someone to talk to, it's different. It feels like maybe there's a reason to keep going. There is a reason, Chook said. You're young. You have a whole life ahead of you. You can do things, be things, go places. This isn't all there is. What about you? Do you have a whole life ahead of you? Chooks didn't answer right away. Honestly, he didn't think he did. He expected to die in this war probably soon. He'd made peace with that. But now, talking to Annie, helping her, being her friend, it made him wonder if maybe there could be more. If maybe surviving wasn't just about staying alive, but about finding reasons to want to stay alive. I don't know, he finally said, but you've given me something to think about. Late in the afternoon, they came across a meadow full of wildflowers. Chooks could see them stretching out in every direction, yellow and purple and white swaying in the breeze. Annie, he said, I'm going to lead you into this meadow, okay? There's something I want you to feel. He guided her carefully through the tall grass until they were surrounded by flowers. Then he knelt down and picked one, a purple lupine with a sweet scent. Hold out your hand, he said. And when she did, he placed the flower in her palm. Smell it. Annie brought the flower to her nose and breathed in deeply. Her face lit up with delight. Oh, it's wonderful. It's a lupine. Purple, about this tall. He guided her hand to show her the height, with lots of little flowers bunched together on one stem. He picked more flowers, Indian paintbrush, pale columbine, wild rose, and described each one as he placed it in her hands. Annie smelled each one, felt the petals carefully, laughed with pure joy at the simple beauty of it. I remember flowers, she said. I remember picking them with my mama, back when she was different, before everything got bad. We'd make chains out of them and she'd put them in my hair. Would you like me to make you a flower chain? Chooks asked. Annie's face showed surprise.
You know how?
My mother taught me. It's not just for girls in my culture. Everyone should know how to make beautiful things. So Chooks sat in the meadow and made a flower chain while Annie waited patiently. His fingers remembered the movements even though it had been years since he'd done this. Split the stem, thread another flower through, repeat. His mother's hands had guided his when he was small, teaching him the pattern. When he finished, he placed the chain carefully on Annie's head. She reached up and touched it gently, feeling the flowers, the way they connected together. How do I look? She asked. Beautiful, Chooks said and meant it, not because of the flowers, but because of the smile on her face, the happiness that radiated from her. In that moment, she wasn't a blind girl, wasn't an abandoned child, wasn't a victim of violence and neglect. She was just Annie, wearing flowers and smiling in the sunlight. She felt the chain again, then said quietly, I'll never forget this. Even after you leave me, even when I'm old, I'll remember the day a Modoc warrior made me a flower crown in a meadow and made me feel beautiful. I'll remember it too, Chooks said. I'll remember the day a brave girl taught me that kindness doesn't require sight, and that friendship can happen even between people who are supposed to be enemies. The settlement appeared just as the sun was, setting on their third day together. Chooks and Annie stood on a ridge overlooking a small collection of houses clustered around what looked like a general store and a church. Smoke rose from chimneys. Lamplight glowed in windows. From this distance, he could see people moving about, finishing their daily tasks as evening approached. It looked peaceful, safe. It was exactly what Annie needed. So why did Chooks feel like his chest was being crushed? We're here, aren't we? Annie asked. She'd gotten good at reading him, at sensing changes in his posture and breathing. Yes, he said quietly. There's a settlement below us. Maybe 30 houses. Looks like good people, farming people. You'll be safe there. Annie didn't say anything for a long moment. The flower chain he'd made her had wilted by now, but she still wore it, had refused to take it off even when it started falling apart. I don't want to go, she finally said, her voice small. I know, but you have to. Why? Why can't I stay with you? Chooks knelt down so he was at her level, even though she couldn't see him. It felt important somehow. Because I can't keep you safe. I'm a warrior in a losing war. I'm being hunted by soldiers who want me dead. Every day I'm alive is borrowed time. If you stay with me, you'll die too. And I can't let that happen. But what if they're mean to me? What if they're like Pa? Then you find someone who isn't. You're smart, Annie, you're strong. You've survived worse than this. And now you know. His voice caught slightly. Now you know that there are people in the world who will be kind to you. That you deserve kindness. Don't ever forget that. Annie's face crumpled and tears started running down her cheeks. I don't want to say goodbye. You're the only friend I ever had. Chooks felt his own eyes burning. You're my friend too. The best friend I've had in a long time. Will you really never see me again? He wanted to lie, to tell her they'd meet again someday, to give her hope. But he'd promised to always be honest with her. Probably not, he said. The world isn't set up for people like us to be friends. There's too much between us. Too much history, too much anger, too much division. That's not fair. No, Chooks agreed. It's not fair at all. He reached into his pack and pulled out the last piece of dried meat, the final bit of food they had left. He placed it in her hand. Here, for tonight. Tomorrow you'll walk down to that settlement. There's a path, and I'm going to guide you to it. You'll follow it downhill. You'll be able to feel the slope with your feet. When you hear voices, you call out. Tell them your name. Tell them you got separated from your family during the evacuation. Don't mention me. Don't tell them about a Modoc warrior. It'll only cause trouble for both of us. I'm scared, Annie whispered. I know. But remember what I told you, you're brave. You walked 3 days through dangerous country and never complained. You can do this last part too. Annie was quiet for a moment, then asked, Can you teach me how to say I won't forget you in your language? I want to know it so I can say it in my head sometimes and remember. Chooks swallowed hard. In his language, he said the phrase, then repeated it slowly so she could learn it. Kaniush mosmosh. Kaniush mosmosh, Annie repeated carefully, her pronunciation imperfect but close enough. Good, that's good. What's your word for thank you? Kani, Chooks. For everything. For not hitting me. For taking me with you. For talking to me like I matter. For making me feel like a real person for the first time in my life. Connie. You don't need to thank me, Annie. You gave me something too. You reminded me that I'm not just a warrior, that there's still something human inside me worth saving. They sat together on that ridge as the sun finished setting, neither one wanting to move, both knowing they had to. The sky turned from orange to pink to purple, and Chooks described every color change to Annie, wanting to give her one last sunset before they parted. Finally, when the stars began to appear, he stood. It's time. He helped Annie to her feet and guided her down the ridge to where a path began. It was well worn, obviously used regularly by people going between the settlement and the outlying farms. Easy to follow even without sight if you were careful. This is the path, he said, taking her hand and placing it on a wooden fence post that marked the trail's beginning. Follow it down. Keep one hand on the fence, it runs all the way to the settlement. When the fence ends, you'll be at the edge of town. That's when you call out. Annie gripped the fence post like it was the only solid thing in the world. What if they don't want me? What if they turn me away? They won't. People aren't all bad, Annie. Most people, when they see a child who needs help, they help. You just happen to get unlucky with your family. But there are good people in this world. I promise you that. You're good people, Annie said. You're proof of that. Chooks felt that familiar tightness in his throat. He reached out and took both of Annie's hands in his. They were small and cold and had calluses that no child's hands should have. Listen to me, he said. You're going to have a life. A real life. You're going to find people who care about you, who see your worth. You're going to grow up and maybe get married someday, maybe have children of your own, and you're going to treat them with kindness, the kind you deserved but didn't get. You're going to break the cycle. Do you understand? Annie nodded, tears streaming down her face. I understand. And Annie? One more thing. Don't let them make you bitter. Don't let what happened to you turn you hard and cold. Stay soft, stay kind. That's the bravest thing you can be in a hard world. I'll try, she whispered. Chooks wanted to hug her, to offer that last bit of comfort, but he wasn't sure if he should. He'd been taught that warriors didn't show such weakness. But then he thought about what Annie had taught him over these 3 days. That kindness wasn't weakness. That compassion was its own kind of strength. So he pulled her into a gentle hug, and she wrapped her thin arms around him and held on tight. Kaniush mosmosh, she said into his chest, her voice muffled. I won't forget you. Kaniush mosmosh, he repeated. I won't forget you either. They stood like that for a long moment, and then Chooks gently pulled away. If he stayed longer, he wouldn't be able to leave at all. Go now, he said softly. Follow the fence. Don't be afraid. You've got this. Annie nodded and turned toward the path, her hand on the fence post. She took one step, then another, then stopped. Chooks? She called back. Yes? In another world, in a better world, we could have been real friends. We could have known each other for a long time. That's what I'm going to choose to believe. That somewhere in some other world we got to be friends without all this other stuff in the way. Chooks smiled even though she couldn't see it. I believe that too. Annie nodded again, then started walking down the path. Chooks watched her go. Watched her small figure moving carefully down the hillside, one hand on the fence, taking slow, deliberate steps. The wilted flower chain was still on her head, and even from a distance, he could see it. He stayed until he saw her reach the edge of the settlement, until he heard her call out in her clear young voice, Hello? Is anyone there? I need help. My name is Annie and I'm lost. He saw doors open, saw people emerge, saw a woman rush forward and wrap Annie in a blanket. He saw them surrounding her, ushering her toward one of the houses, taking her in, giving her the help she needed. Only then did Chooks turn away. He moved back up the ridge, back into the darkness, back toward the war that was waiting for him. As he walked, he touched his chest where Annie had hugged him, and he realized he was crying. He hadn't cried since Litsa died. He'd thought that part of him had dried up completely, that he'd used up all his tears and had none left. But here they were, running down his face in the darkness, and he didn't try to stop them. He cried for Annie, for all she'd suffered and all she'd survive. He cried for Litsa, for the sister he couldn't save. He cried for his people fighting a war they couldn't win. He cried for the settlers, too, scared families fleeing their homes, caught up in violence they didn't fully understand. He cried for the world as it was, and for the world as it should be. And when he finally stopped crying, when he wiped his face and took a deep breath, he felt different, lighter somehow, like he'd been carrying a weight he didn't know was there, and setting it down had made space for something else. Hope, maybe. Or at least the memory of what hope felt like. He thought about Annie's words, that in another world, a better world, they could have been friends without all the complications. And he realized she was right. The war, the hatred, the division, none of it was natural. It had all been created by people, which meant it could be unmade by people too. Maybe not in his lifetime. Maybe not even in Annie's, but someday. He looked back one last time toward the settlement, though he couldn't see it anymore in the darkness. "Goodbye, T-Wish," he whispered. "Goodbye, my friend." Then he turned north toward the lava beds, toward his people, toward whatever future waited for him there. He was still a warrior. The war wasn't over, but something inside him had changed, had been healed by 3 days with a blind girl who'd taught him how to be human again. He walked through the night, and for the first time in a long time, Chooks wasn't just surviving, he was living. 3 weeks later, Chooks stood in chains. The war had ended the way he'd always known it would. The Modoc warriors, outnumbered and exhausted, had finally surrendered. Some had been killed in the final battles. Some had been executed immediately after capture. The rest, including Chooks, were being held in a makeshift prison camp, waiting to learn their fates. He should have been more afraid than he was. Death was probably coming. The government didn't take kindly to people who fought back, who resisted, who dared to want freedom on their own land. But Chooks found that he wasn't as scared as he thought he'd be. Something had changed in him during those 3 days with Annie. He'd reconnected with a part of himself he'd thought was lost forever. And that part, that human part, made even imprisonment and possible death feel different. He could endure this because he knew he'd done at least one thing right. He'd saved a life instead of taking one. He'd chosen kindness when cruelty would have been easier. He'd proven to himself that war hadn't completely destroyed who he was. The other prisoners noticed the change in him too. They whispered about it sometimes, wondering why Chooks seemed calmer than the rest of them, almost peaceful in a way that didn't make sense given their circumstances. Wayhaks, who was imprisoned in the same camp, asked him about it one night. "What happened to you after that day with the settler girl?" Chooks thought about how to answer. "I remembered something I'd forgotten, that we're fighting for our humanity, not just for land. And if we lose our humanity in the fight, we've already lost everything that matters." Wayhaks was quiet for a moment, then said, "Did you get her somewhere safe? The girl?" "Yes, I watched until I was sure she was taken in, that she'd be cared for." "That was a good thing you did. A hard thing, but good. It was the only thing I could do and still live with myself." The weeks in the prison camp were difficult. The conditions were harsh, the food scarce, the future uncertain. But Chooks found he could bear it better than he'd expected. When the darkness seemed overwhelming, when despair threatened to take hold, he'd think about Annie. He'd remember her smile when she smelled the flowers. He'd remember her voice saying, "Kanush mosmosh, I won't forget you." And he'd remember that even in the worst circumstances, even when everything seemed hopeless, there was still room for kindness. Still space for humanity. Still a choice to be made about what kind of person you wanted to be. Eventually, Chooks and the other surviving warriors were told their fate. They would not be executed, but they would be sent far away to a reservation in Indian Territory, hundreds of miles from their homeland. They would never see the lake again, never walk the lava beds, never return to the place where their ancestors had lived for thousands of years. It was a different kind of death. The death of a way of life. The death of connection to the land that defined them. But it was survival, and Chooks had learned that survival itself was a kind of victory. The journey to the new reservation took months. It was hard, and many people didn't survive it. The old ones especially couldn't endure the travel, the strange climate, the grief of leaving their homeland. Chooks watched more people die, buried more friends, carried more sorrow. But through it all, he held on to what Annie had taught him. He helped the weak when he could. He shared what little he had. He spoke words of encouragement to those who were losing hope. He tried to be the kind of person his sister would have been proud of, the kind of person his mother had tried to raise him to be. On the reservation, life was different. Hard in new ways. The land was nothing like home. The rules were strict and often cruel. The government agents were indifferent at best, hostile at worst. Disease continued to take people and despair took even more. But Chuk survived. He survived, and more than that, he tried to help others survive too. He became known as someone who would listen, who would help, who still believed that kindness mattered even in a place designed to break their spirits. Years passed. The Modoc War became history, another chapter in the long story of conquest and resistance. The people who'd fought in it grew older, and eventually some were allowed to marry, to have families, to build new lives within the confines of reservation boundaries. Chooks married a woman named Mina, whose family had also been displaced. She was kind and strong, and she loved him even when he woke up from nightmares about the war. Together they had 3 children, 2 daughters and a son, and it was to these children, when they were old enough to understand, that Chooks told the story. He told them about the war, yes, but not in the way other warriors told their war stories. He didn't brag about battles or count enemy dead. Instead, he told them about a moment when his hand had raised in anger and then began to shake. He told them about a blind girl named Annie, who'd taught him that the enemy is never just an enemy, that every person has a story, that suffering doesn't recognize the boundaries people draw between themselves. I was so angry, he told his children one evening, sitting around a small fire in their reservation home. I'd let hate fill up all the spaces in my heart where love used to be. And I thought that was strength. I thought that was what it meant to be a warrior. His youngest daughter, who was about the age Annie had been, asked, "But it wasn't?" "No," Chuk said. "Real strength is being able to choose kindness when you have the power to choose cruelty. Real courage is letting yourself feel compassion, even when the world has given you every reason not to. That's what Annie taught me." "Did you ever see her again?" his son asked. "Annie?" "No, I never did. I don't even know if she's still alive. But I think about her sometimes. I wonder if she's happy, if she found people who were kind to her, if she remembers those 3 days the way I do." His wife, Mina, who'd heard this story before but never tired of it, added, "Your father's moment with that girl changed him back into the man he was meant to be. If I'd met him before that, when he was all anger and coldness, I don't think I could have loved him. But the man who came back from that journey, the man who'd learned to be human again, that man I could love." Chooks reached over and squeezed her hand. Then he looked at his children, their faces serious in the firelight, and said, "This is what I want you to remember. This is what I want you to carry forward. The world is full of reasons to hate, full of injustices that make you want to harden your heart. And sometimes you have to fight. There are things worth fighting for." He paused, making sure they were listening. "But don't ever let fighting turn you into something you're not. Don't ever let anger eat away at the good parts of yourself. And when you have the choice, when you're standing with your hand raised and you can choose to hurt or to help, choose to help, even when it's hard. Especially when it's hard." His older daughter asked, "Is that why you're always helping people? Even people who aren't nice to you?" Chuk smiled. "Yes, because Annie showed me that one act of kindness can change everything. I was lost and she helped me find my way back to myself. Now I try to do the same for others. It doesn't fix the big problems, doesn't change the fact that we're here instead of in our homeland. But it means something. It keeps us human, and that matters." The children were quiet for a moment, thinking about the story. Then his son said, "I'm glad your hand shook, Papa. I'm glad you didn't hurt her." "Me too," Chooks said quietly. "Me too." As the years continued to pass, Chooks grew old. His hair turned gray, then white. His body, which had been strong and lean in his warrior days, became bent and weathered. But his spirit, that part of him that Annie had helped heal, remained intact. He became a respected elder in the community, not because he'd been a great warrior, but because he'd been a good man. People came to him with their problems, their sorrows, their questions about how to live with dignity in undignified circumstances, and he always had time for them, always offered what wisdom he could. He told Annie's story many times over the years to different people in different contexts. It became his teaching story, the one he used to illustrate the most important lesson he'd learned: that our humanity is tested not by how we treat our friends, but by how we treat those we've been taught to see as enemies. Near the end of his life, when he was too old and sick to leave his bed, his children gathered around him. They knew the end was coming and they wanted to be there. Papa, his youngest daughter said, holding his weathered hand, what do you want us to remember most? Chooks thought about all the things he could say, all the wisdom he'd accumulated over a long and difficult life. But in the end, he came back to that moment in the root cellar, to the trembling hand, to the choice that had changed everything. Remember, he said, his voice weak but clear, that mercy is not weakness. Compassion is not surrender, and every person, no matter who they are or where they come from, carries the same light inside them. We're all just trying to survive, trying to find meaning, trying to be loved and to love in return. He paused, breathing slowly. The world tried to teach me to hate. It gave me plenty of reasons. But Annie taught me something better. She taught me that even in the darkest times, even when we're supposed to be enemies, we can still recognize each other's humanity. And that recognition, that moment of seeing someone as a person rather than as the other, that's sacred. That's what saves us.